Today, NATO is stronger than it's ever been in its history. When this senseless war began, Ukraine was a free country. Today, it is still a free country. And the war will end with Ukraine remaining a free and independent country.
President Biden kicked off the NATO 75th anniversary summit in Washington with a rousing speech, highlighting the importance of the alliance and its support for Ukraine in its defensive war with Russia. It was also a chance for Biden to show strength and command, as many elected Democrats and voters in general worry about his ability to lead the country. The Hill White House columnist Niall Stanage joins us to discuss. Niall, what are the reviews on Biden's speech?
I think they're broadly positive so far as it goes, Drew. I mean, obviously he needed to show competence and some degree of vigour. It was a fairly strongly delivered speech. He hit all the points that you would expect him to hit. And it did give him a chance to sort of be the person on the world stage. Now, against that, obviously it was a scripted speech. Obviously he was using a teleprompter. The much bigger challenge is expected to come on Thursday when he holds a news conference.
Yeah, let's talk about that Thursday, Biden's solo press availability at the NATO conference. That's shaping up to be a pivotal event. What is the format and what will you be watching for?
So there is some uncertainty still about the format. The White House Press Secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, was asked about that at one of the briefings I attended. She suggested it would be more than the format we typically see in international events where the president gets asked 2 questions and a foreign leader gets asked 2 questions. This will be a solo press conference. We're expecting a reasonable number of questions. Obviously, the big issue is just simply how the president appears. Can he reinforce this idea that he's ultimately fine, or does he instead reinforce the doubts that voters have, the doubts that his mental acuity isn't what it needs to be for someone in that job?
Let's talk about NATO. Lots of talk about strength and unity at the conference. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky lobbied for his country's entrance into NATO. But there are questions about the future of the alliance, especially with the prospects of Donald Trump returning to the White House.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, President Zelensky referred to comments being made in the shadow, as he put it, of November's election. NATO, like other multilateral institutions, is one that former President Trump seems pretty skeptical of. He favours a more America first, as he would put it, isolationist tending foreign policy. Now, this summit, obviously here in DC, is an opportunity for the United States under the Biden administration to show its leadership there, the Ukraine question hanging over proceedings very much.
Trump held a campaign rally last night in South Florida, while Republicans have largely stayed out of the post-debate Democratic panic. Trump did direct some fire at Vice President Harris. Are Republicans preparing for a campaign against Harris should Biden eventually step aside?
Yeah, I think they are, and I think it's sort of automatic or natural that they would do. Right now, of course, President Biden says he's adamant about staying in the race. But if that changes, and it could change on a dime, then obviously the vice president would be the obvious heir apparent. She does have her own political weaknesses and vulnerabilities, Drew, as we're aware. Her polling numbers are not that much better, if at all better, than Biden's. So I think Republicans would be certainly willing to train some fire on her, even before any realistic suggestion that she's about to become the nominee.
Now, speaking of that Democratic panic, Congress is back in Washington. Democrats are besides themselves. Many convinced Biden can't win, but reluctant to publicly call for him to get out of the race. Nancy Pelosi today rather opaque in commenting on Biden, asked if Biden has her support. Pelosi basically said it's up to Biden, not really an answer. But what is the state of play in the Democratic Party?
So right now we have 7 Democratic House members who have publicly called for President Biden to step aside. Mickey Sherrill of New Jersey was the most recent addition to that list. The Pelosi comments that you mentioned were interesting, largely because it was a long way short of a vigorous expression of support for President Biden. It was sort of saying, well, we'll see how things go. We are short on time. So to me, that lack of support is indicative of the fact that the Biden team's push to quell dissent has not fully worked.
The Republican National Convention starts Monday in Milwaukee. Trump is set to formally accept his party's nomination for president. That's probably a welcome event for the Biden campaign to take some eyes off the president and focus voters on Trump and the policies of Republicans. Does the RNC have a chance to change the narrative in the 2024 race?
Well, certainly the fact that the focus will turn to Milwaukee in the Republican convention will probably be quite welcome for a lot of Democrats, honestly, because this story about President Biden's acuity has dominated everything since the June 27th debate. Now, there will be potential bonuses or benefits for Republicans as well, of course, from the convention. The media attention in and of itself, obviously, the event will be built around former President Trump, but the big element of suspense that we're still waiting for is who he will name as his running mate.
All right, Niall Stanage, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Rudy Giuliani's bankruptcy case is coming to a crossroads this week. A U.S. bankruptcy judge will address 3 competing proposals from Giuliani, his creditors, and one from 2 Georgia election workers who have a $148 million judgment against the former Trump attorney. Giuliani filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy back in December, and since then, creditors have accused him of using delay tactics to keep control of his finances while overspending and hiding assets. In motions filed with the court, they are seeking sanctions and an independent trustee to take control. The 2 Georgia election workers, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, have asked the judge to dismiss Giuliani's bankruptcy entirely in hopes that they can pursue enforcing the multi-million-dollar judgment. Last week, Giuliani shifted his strategy in the proceedings, signing a motion to convert his bankruptcy to Chapter 7, which would liquidate his assets and strip control over his finances. This change could make it increasingly difficult for creditors to have access to Giuliani's income. At the hearing this week, the judge will decide which proposal to move forward with. A Russian court has issued a warrant for the widow of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who died in a Russian penal colony earlier this year. During a hearing this week, the court in Russia filed a warrant against Yulia Navalnaya on charges of alleged involvement in an extremist group. Navalnaya currently lives abroad but would face immediate arrest if she were to return to Russia. Navalnaya slammed the court order on social media, calling Putin a killer and war criminal and saying he should be the one who is prosecuted. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.